Hello YouTube and welcome back to another 3D Ross tutorial. In this tutorial I'll show you how you can create a zoom function in Unreal Engine and use increment stages as shown here. So we can zoom in 3 different levels, 1, 2, 3 and then zoom back out. And as you can see we've got a smooth transition on all of them. So let's jump right in and I'll show you how it's done. To start off with, I'm going to open our player character. In this example I'm using the first person character, so we can either select the character in game, in the scene, and go edit blueprint, open blueprint, or it can be found in this path here. With this open, I'm just going to find an empty space to start working. I'm just going to start working below this code here, which is the basic code we set up for the crouch function that you can find on my YouTube channel. But anyway, back to this video. So to initiate the zoom, I'm going to use the right mouse button. You can use whatever key you'd like, but I'm just going to right click in our graph and type in right mouse button. And now we've got these options on pressed. So when we press right mouse button, we want to zoom in. And to zoom in, I'm going to use a timeline. So I'm going to right click and type in timeline. Hit enter and create a timeline, and I'm just going to call this zoom. With the timeline here, I'm just going to double click it to open it up, and I'm going to add a float track. A float track is basically just a track like this, and it uses a float variable instead of say a vector or a color track. And this first float track, we're going to have different float tracks for the different levels of zoom. So this is going to be our zoom level 1. So I'm just going to zoom 01. I'm going to set the length to 0.2 seconds. And now if I shift left click, I can create a point on the graph. This is our first keyframe. I'm going to make this keyframe start at 0. And I'm going to set the value to our first person camera field of view. So by default this is 90, but to double check you could click on the camera, and if you open up in the viewport you can see our field of view is 90. Now going back to the timeline, I'm just going to type 90 in our value. Now with that 90 value we'll want to create our next value. So I'm just going to shift left click again, and on the time I'm going to choose the end of our graph, which is 0.2, and I'm going to set our value to our new field of view. So we want a less field of view to zoom in more. So I'm going to set this to, let's say, 75 degrees. And as you can see, if we type the correct values in again, because I've just accidentally moved it, so if we use the right mouse button and the scroll wheel zoom out, you can see there's our keyframes on the graph here. Now we're going to do some more tracks, so I'm going to do 2 or 3 more tracks. So I'm just going to add another float track and call this zoom 02, and the exact same again. I'm going to shift left click, set the time to 0, and this time our value is going to be the end value of this track, because we're going to go in increments from this track to the next track to the next track. So our last value was 75, so I'm just going to type 75 as the value. So this one now starts off where this one left off. Now if I shift left click again, set the time to 0.2, and now this is our next stage of the zoom. So I'm just going to use 60 as our next field of view. And I'm going to add another graph, and this is going to be our final zoom level. Shift left click, set the time to 0, and then set the value to the same as our final value in the track beforehand. In this case it was 60. And then again shift left click, set the time to 0.2, and set the value to our new zoom level. I'm going to choose 45 as our furthest zoom. So now we've got that, we can zoom into 45. So I will show you this in practice in a moment, but I'm just going to go ahead and create the final graph. So I'm just going to rename this first to zoom 03, I'm going to create our final graph. I'm going to call it zoom back out. And again, shift left click, time 0, the value of our last graph, which was 45. And then shift left click, 0.2, and then our final value here, I'm going to loop it all the way back around to this first graph. So I'm going to loop it back to our default value of 90. So we move our way through the graph, this graph, this graph, this graph, and then once we've got to our highest zoom level, I'm just going to zoom back out to 90. So I'm going to type in value of 90. That way at the end we go from 45 back to 90. So if I go back to my event graph, on press play, we are going to play the timeline. So on update, this keeps updating, so these values will go in increments. With these values constantly updating and going up, we want to set our camera's field of view to those values. So if I get the first person camera and I just left click drag this in and create a pin off and type in set field of view, we now have a field of view here. So on update we would set the field of view, but we want to do something first because we won't know which value we want to choose. So to select that, I'm just going to use a stage variable, and this is going to tell us which stage we are currently in, be it 1, 2 or 3. So to do that, I'm just going to go to our variables here in the left corner, and as you can see I've created a stage variable and I've made it an integer. So you just add a variable here, type in the name. So if I add a variable, type it stage or whatever you want to call it, and create it as an integer, which is a whole number. And I'm going to start off at stage 1 instead of 0, just because I find that easier and it makes it less confusing. So if we drag this in now and if we get our stage, and we create a branch by holding B and left clicking, or right clicking and type in branch, we can get a condition here. So our condition is we want to check the value of stage. So I'm going to left click drag off stage and type in equals. So equals integer. So if stage equals a number, and if that is true, do this. If it's false, do that. So for our first one, I'm going to check if stage is 1. And if stage is 1, then we want to do the first field of view change. And if stage is not 1, we want to do the next field of view change. So I'm just going to copy this. So like that. But you might notice we have loads of different field of view changes. So to get more, I'm just going to do the same. I'm going to create a new branch. Copy the original, and if it's not equal to 1, we now want to check if it's equal to 2, and then same again. If it's true, do the second field of view. If not, we want to do the third. So I'm going to copy and create a new branch again. Is it equal to 3? If it is, we want to do the third change. If not, we want to do the fourth change. And I'm just going to hook up the first person camera on each of these. So now we have this here. How do we control this value, stage value going up? How do we know which stage we are in? So to do that, I'm going to do on the finish track. So when this zoom function has finished, so when one of these graphs has finished, we want to get our current stage number. So if we're in stage 1, we want to plus 1 to that to make it 2. If we're in stage 2, once that stage is finished, we're going to +1, so we're in stage 3 now. So to do that, I'm just going to create another branch on finished, and we're going to check if stage equals 4, because that is our final value. So it keeps going up 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if 4 has completed, then we want to go back to 0. So I'm just going to move this out of the way. So if we get stage set, so if we're equal to 4 and 4 has just finished, then we're going to set stage back to 1, not 0, because I set our first value to 1. If we're not at 4 yet, then we want to add another value on. So we're going to take stage, the stage value, and we're going to plus 1, as you can see here, and we're going to do another set, and we're going to set it to that. So the current number plus 1 makes us go on to the next stage. So now we have that, and this should work through. We also want to check if we're zooming in or not. So if we play this now, and I right click, you can see it goes like this, and it is broke. And that is because we haven't set the field of view values. So remember, zoom 1 is going to go at the field of view for our first stage. Zoom 2 is going to go into the field of view of our second stage. 3, and then our final one's going to go zoom back out to the default. Compile and save that. Now we can see how this plays out. If I right click, we zoom 1, right click, zoom again, right click, zoom again, right click, we zoom back out. So what we can do as well to stop any jumpiness, we can make sure we play from the start, but we can also use a branch again and check if we're currently zooming. So once the timeline starts to play a track, then we're going to be in zooming mode. So to tell that, I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call it is zooming ? And that is going to be a boolean, so true or false. And by default it's not going to be false, because when we start the game we're not going to be zooming in. But when the timeline is playing, we're going to set zooming to true, because we're now zooming. And when we are finished, so when we've finished that stage of zooming, we want to set it to false, because we're no longer zooming. And I'm just going to do this after our set stage, just to make sure that we can't change the zoom before these values have changed, just so we don't confuse the program. So now to start off with, if is zooming, if we're already zooming, then we don't want to do anything. If we are not zooming anymore, then we want to play each graph from the start again. And if we didn't have this checked, we could be slowly zooming in, but if we zoom from the start, we could be halfway through a zoom and we press it again and it suddenly jumps a track, and then we get a really jarring jerkiness. So this just helps make things run a bit smoother. So if we save this and play it now, you can see our zooming moves in. And as you can see, I can click the mouse as fast as possible, but none of the zoomings get interrupted and we don't have that jerkiness. So yeah, that's how you set up the incremental zooming. If you want to zoom even further, of course you can open the timeline, and you can set each value to a lower value. So let's say we want to zoom in a lot at the end. I'm going to change 45 to something like 15, and I'm just going to update the graph after rather, the value to 15 just to match that. Now if we go back and play, we zoom in a bit, we zoom in a bit, and then we'll zoom in a lot. And we right click and we zoom back out. So yeah, you got the flexibility of changing this graph, and if you want the zoom to be slower, just change the length of the graph, or use last keyframe and set all of the last keyframes to a longer time frame. So yeah, I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you can incorporate this into whatever cool project you're working on. And as shown in the graph, there is a crouch function, which was my previous video, so if that interests you at all, check out the link at the end of this video to see that video. But yeah, I hope this tutorial was helpful for you if you're creating, say, a sniper scope, or you're doing anything of that nature that involves zooming in. I hope this was helpful for you. If you found it helpful, please do give it a like, and comment down below if you found it helpful. If you have any problems, please do let me know in the comments below. The same with any suggestions. Please consider subscribing, it helps me out a lot, and it is free. So yeah, please don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.